Tom? Thomas Harrison? Is that you? The elderly visitor's voice trembled as he stared at the museum guide standing next to the Vietnam War display. 47 years had passed since Firebase Charlie, since the jungle, since the day this quiet man had saved his life with a single impossible shot from 800 yards away. But Tom Harrison wasn't supposed to be here in this small-town museum giving tours about wars he'd rather forget. He was supposed to be a legend that lived only in classified files and whispered stories among snipers who knew the name Ghost 6, the most lethal marksman in Vietnam War history. The old man's eyes filled with tears as recognition dawned, and suddenly every visitor in the National Infantry Museum of Columbus, Georgia, was about to discover that their soft-spoken tour guide wasn't just someone who studied military history. He had written it, one shot at a time. Welcome to Echo Stories. Before we begin this powerful reunion, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. The National Infantry Museum in Columbus, Georgia, sat quietly on the outskirts of Fort Benning. It wasn't the Smithsonian, but for a small military town, it held treasures that most people walked past without understanding their true significance. Thomas "Tom" Harrison, 72 years old, had been a volunteer tour guide there for 12 years. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he'd arrive at 9 a.m. sharp, put on his museum volunteer badge, and lead groups through exhibits spanning from the Revolutionary War to modern conflicts. Tom was the kind of guide visitors loved, patient, knowledgeable, never condescending. He had a way of making history come alive without being dramatic about it. When kids asked about the weapons, he'd explain how they worked. When veterans visited, he'd listen respectfully to their stories. But Tom never told his own stories. His badge simply read, Thomas Harrison, Volunteer Guide. No military rank, no unit designation, no hint of his past. To the museum staff, he was just a retired gentleman who loved history and had time to share it with others. We'll start in the Vietnam section today, Tom announced to his Tuesday morning group, a mix of school children, their teachers, and a few tourists. This conflict changed how America viewed war, and it's important we understand why. He led them past the familiar displays, uniforms, equipment, photographs of young soldiers in a jungle half a world away. Tom's voice remained steady and professional as always, even when discussing the war that had defined his youth. The group was examining a display case containing sniper rifles when the elderly man appeared. He'd entered quietly, the way old soldiers often did, and was studying Tom from across the room. The man was in his early 70s, wearing a VFW cap and walking with a slight limp. His eyes, though aged, still held the alertness that never quite left certain veterans. Tom noticed him. Old habits made him aware of everyone in his space, but continued his presentation about the various weapons used in Southeast Asia. This M40A1 was the primary sniper rifle used by Marine Corps precision shooters, Tom explained to a curious teenager. Effective range of about 800 yards in the right hands. The elderly visitor stepped closer, his breathing becoming audible. The Marines had some exceptional marksmen in Vietnam, Tom continued, unaware of the drama building behind him. Men who could make shots that saved entire platoons. Shots like Firebase Charlie, the visitor whispered, just loud enough for Tom to hear. Tom's hand froze on the display case. His entire body went still. Slowly, he turned around. Tom? Thomas Harrison? Is that you? The question hung in the air like smoke from a rifle barrel. Tom's face went pale as he looked into eyes he hadn't seen since 1971. Jimmy? Jimmy Castellanos? The old man nodded, tears already forming. Corporal James Castellanos, 2nd Platoon, Bravo Company, Firebase Charlie, March 15th, 1971. The museum visitors sensed something significant was happening, but they couldn't understand what. The two men stared at each other across 50 years of silence. Tom's professional composure cracked for the first time anyone at the museum had ever seen. I thought you didn't make it out. I did. Because of you. The school group looked confused. Their calm, grandfatherly tour guide seemed to be transforming before their eyes. His shoulders straightened slightly, his eyes sharpened, and something in his bearing suggested this was no ordinary reunion. "Kids," one of the teachers whispered, "I think we should give these gentlemen some privacy." But Jimmy shook his head. "Numbers stay. This man," he pointed at Tom, "this man should have a Medal of Honor, but his missions were so classified they couldn't even acknowledge what he did." Tom's face flushed. "Jimmy, don't." "Firebase Charlie was overrun," Jimmy continued, his voice growing stronger. 37 Americans surrounded by over 200 NVA. We were cut off, no air support, and they were picking us off one by one. The museum had gone completely quiet. Even the staff had stopped what they were doing. I was wounded, bleeding out behind an ammunition crate. Charlie had 6 snipers in the tree line, and they had us pinned down. Every time someone tried to help the wounded, they'd get taken out. Tom closed his eyes, clearly not wanting this story told. Then this ghost appeared. 1 shot, 800 yards, first sniper down. 2 minutes later, another shot, second sniper eliminated. For the next 4 hours, Ghost 6 systematically removed every sniper from those trees. A teenage visitor raised her hand tentatively. "Ghost 6, Jimmy smiled through his tears. That was his call sign. Thomas Ghost 6 Harrison, the most lethal sniper in the Vietnam War. Confirmed kills. How many was it, Tom?" Tom's voice was barely a whisper. 247. The number hit the museum like a thunderclap. 247 confirmed kills. The quiet man who'd been patiently explaining exhibits for 12 years had been one of the most effective soldiers in American military history. "But that's not why I remember him," Jimmy continued. "I remember him because after he cleared those snipers, he came down from his position, crawled 400 yards through enemy fire to get to me, carried me to the evacuation point while taking fire the whole way." "I was trained to do that," Tom said quietly. "No, you weren't trained to do that. You chose to do that. There's a difference." The museum director, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, had been drawn by the commotion. She stood at the edge of the group, listening with growing amazement. "Mr. Harrison," she said softly, "in all these years you never mentioned—" "Because it wasn't important," Tom replied. "That was a different life. This is my life now." "Not important," Jimmy's voice rose slightly. "Tom, you saved 37 lives that day. 37 men came home to their families because of you." "Tell them about the other missions," Jimmy pressed. "Tell them about Duke Pho. Tell them about the river crossing at An Khe." Tom shook his head. "Those are old stories, Jimmy." "Old pain." "No, they're not old. They're eternal. These kids need to know what real service looks like." A young boy, maybe 10 years old, tugged on Tom's sleeve. "Mister, you were really a soldier?" Tom knelt down to the boy's level. "Yes, I was." "Were you scared?" Tom considered this carefully. "Every day. But being scared doesn't mean you don't do what needs to be done. Why didn't you tell us before?" "Because I'm not a soldier anymore. I'm just someone who helps people learn about history." Jimmy interjected. "He's being modest." After Vietnam, Tom spent 15 more years training other snipers. Some of the men he taught went on to serve in Desert Storm, Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan. He didn't just serve his country for 1 war. He served for 3 decades. Dr. Mitchell looked around the Vietnam exhibit with new eyes. "Mr. Harrison, that rifle you were just showing us, did you?" Tom nodded slowly. M40A1, serial number 2,471,563. "Yes, that was mine." The teenagers stared at the weapon with new reverence. This wasn't just a museum piece anymore. It was the tool that had saved American lives. "There are 3 other weapons in this museum that belong to me," Tom admitted. I donated them when I started volunteering here. The staff never asked, and I never explained. Which ones? Dr. Mitchell asked, her voice filled with awe. Tom walked over to another case. M21 sniper system. Used that in training new marksmen at Quantico. He moved to a third display. And this Remington 700 was my personal weapon during instructor years. The visitors were seeing the museum through completely different eyes now. These weren't just artifacts. They were tools used by the man standing right next to them. Jimmy wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Tom, I've thought about Firebase Charlie every day for 50 years. I've told my kids about Ghost 6. I've told my grandkids. You're a legend in my family. I'm not a legend, Jimmy. I was just doing my job. Your job? Your job was to eliminate enemy snipers. What you did was save lives. There's a difference. One of the teachers spoke up. Mr. Harrison, why don't you tell these stories during your tours? Tom was quiet for a long moment. Because war isn't something to glorify. It's something to understand. When I talk about these weapons, I want people to think about the cost of using them, not just their effectiveness, but your service, your sacrifice. My sacrifice was leaving pieces of myself in that jungle. Coming home was the reward. Living a quiet life was the prize I earned. Jimmy reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. I've carried this for 47 years. The image showed young soldiers in jungle fatigues. Tom was barely recognizable, lean, intense, with eyes that held none of the peace they had now. That's Bravo Company, 3 days before Firebase Charlie. You're right there, Jimmy pointed to a young man holding a rifle. You look so serious. Tom smiled, the first real smile anyone had seen from him that day. I was 25 years old and scared to death most of the time. But you never showed it. Snipers can't show fear. The moment you show fear, you lose the confidence of everyone depending on you. Dr. Mitchell addressed the school group. What you're witnessing is very rare. It's not often that living history walks among us. Tom shook his head. History isn't about the past. It's about what we choose to do with what we've learned. What did you learn? Asked one of the teenagers. That taking a life, even in war, even to save lives, changes you forever. That coming home is just the beginning of service, not the end. That the most important battles are often the ones no one ever hears about. Do you regret it? The teenager pressed. Tom looked at Jimmy, then back at the young face asking the question. I regret that it was necessary. I don't regret that I was able to help my fellow soldiers come home. As the formal tour ended, Jimmy lingered. Tom, I have to ask, why here? Why this museum? Tom gestured around the exhibits. Because every weapon here, every uniform, every photograph represents someone's son, someone's father, someone's sacrifice. When visitors see these things, I want them to understand the weight of what they're looking at. And by being here yourself, by being here, I remind myself that these artifacts aren't just objects, they're memories, and memories deserve respect. Jimmy nodded, understanding. You've been carrying all of us with you, haven't you? Everyone you saved, everyone you couldn't save. Every day, Tom admitted. But that's what we do. We carry them so their stories don't get lost. Word of the reunion spread quickly through the small military community. By evening, several other Vietnam veterans had come to the museum, hoping to meet the legendary Ghost 6. Tom found himself in the unusual position of being the center of attention, something he'd avoided for decades. I heard you were the best, one veteran said simply. I was effective, Tom corrected. The best ones were the ones who brought everyone home. Dr. Mitchell approached him privately. Tom, I hope you know that this doesn't change anything. You're still welcome here, still valued as a volunteer. I appreciate that, but I understand if having me here becomes complicated. Complicated? Tom, having you here is an honor. I just wish we'd known. You knew everything that mattered. You knew I respected this place and these stories. The next Thursday, Tom returned for his regular volunteer shift. The museum staff treated him the same as always, though there was perhaps a deeper respect in their greetings. His first tour group included several visitors who had heard about the previous week's revelation. "Are you really Ghost 6? A middle-aged man asked directly. Tom paused at the Vietnam exhibit. "I was a sniper in the 1st Infantry Division from 1970 to 1972. What you call me isn't as important as what you learn from these displays." He continued with his tour, professional as always, but something had changed. His explanations carried more weight, his silences felt more profound. When they reached his old rifle, he stopped. "This weapon saved American lives," he said simply. "I pray no one ever needs to use one like it again, but I'm grateful it was there when we needed it." Months later, Jimmy returned with his family. His grandson, a high school student considering military service, wanted to meet the man his grandfather had talked about for years. "Is it true you never missed?" the teenager asked. Tom smiled. "Son, in war, missing means your friends don't come home. You don't think about your record. You think about the soldier counting on you to keep him safe." "Would you do it again?" Tom looked around the museum, at the artifacts and photographs and memories preserved there. "I hope no one ever has to. But if they do, I hope they remember that the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy. It's bringing your friends home safe." Jimmy nodded, understanding that in this quiet museum, among these silent artifacts, his old friend had found a different way to continue serving, by helping others understand the true cost of freedom. And so, in a small military museum in Georgia, a chance encounter revealed that sometimes our most powerful protectors hide their strength behind the gentlest service. Tom Harrison wasn't just preserving history. He was living proof that heroism doesn't always announce itself. Real warriors know that the hardest battles are often fought in silence, and the greatest victories are measured not in what you destroy, but in what you save. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, support Echo Stories by subscribing. See you in the next video. And remember, that quiet guide showing you around might be carrying more history than any exhibit could ever hold.